Asteroid impact. For 160 million years, the Earth was dominated by the dinosaurs. Mammals, like the ancestors of humans, lived under their shadows. Then 66 million years ago, an asteroid hit the Earth, wiping out most of the dinosaurs. Afterwards, mammals began to dominate the Earth. But without the asteroid killing 75% of the dinosaur species, humans wouldn't have been able to evolve at all. Bipedalism. 5 million years ago, hominins began walking upright and changed the trajectory of our species. Nobody is really sure why it happened. Some say that climate change turned the lush forests in Africa into a savanna, forcing hominins to travel to far distances for food. Some experts say that walking upright exposed less of our body to the sun, and that it made humans appear larger and more intimidating. Nonetheless, walking brought several advantages to our ancestors. It allowed them a greater field of vision, so they could spot predators or food from farther away. It freed up their hands so they could carry food or make tools. Without this feature, we wouldn't have become the dominant species on Earth. Bipedalism also changed our hips and legs, allowing us to throw projectiles from a distance. This was a game changer for a species that doesn't have sharp claws and whose teeth can only harm vegetables. Tools. The oldest tools used by humans are from 2.6 million years ago. Tools allowed our ancestors to break bones to get the nutritious marrow inside. Tough plants could also be grinded before eating, making them easier to digest. This freed up more energy for the brain and allowed it to grow. Making tools required planning, as you needed to visualize the finished product before making it. The development of this cognitive ability was crucial for us. It's the reason we can create art or machines. Tool making also created bonds between adults and children, as it was a skill that was learned through teaching and imitation. But perhaps the most important aspect was the beginning of cumulative culture, where each generation improved the tools made by the previous generation. Over time, their tools became more sophisticated, including hand axes, spears, and bows and arrows. Cumulative culture is the reason why we have pistols and missiles today. Fire. Humans likely mastered the use of fire around 1.5 million years ago, and it changed their lives forever. Fire allowed humans to cook their meat, making them easier to digest. As a result, their bodies could spend less energy metabolizing the food. When their stomach didn't need all that energy to digest food, it could be used up by their brain. So the human brain grew bigger. Fire increased the human population as well. They could fend off predators at night, live in colder climates, and have more children. Cooked food removes toxins from raw meat, providing a nutritious meal for children. Women could start weaning their babies as early as possible. Fire also changed our circadian rhythm. Before the fire, our ancestors slept when the sun went down, but fire allowed them to be awake far longer into the night. Gathering around a fire may have increased socialization and bonding between people. It might have led to the development of language. Language. Complex language may have emerged in Homo sapiens around 100,000 years ago. The reason why it developed varies according to each expert. Some say it emerged because humans started living in larger groups and needed communication to avoid conflict. Some say it emerged because they needed some way to teach tool making to their children. Regardless, language brought several benefits. Language enabled cooperation on large scales during hunting. It allowed humans to pass down their knowledge to their offsprings. Knowledge about what to eat, what to avoid, and how to make things. Animals can only know things by directly experiencing it or having it in their DNA. But we can experience pain, happiness, sadness, danger, and jealousy through storytelling, which is enabled by language. Language also created abstract concepts like justice, money, and God. This was crucial later for creating civilization. Agricultural Revolution. The agricultural revolution began around 12,000 years ago. Before the agricultural revolution, humans hunted for food. They worked for a few hours and spent the rest of the day exploring or daydreaming. Their diet was mostly meat, nuts, and fruits. They lived in a small group of around 20 to 40 individuals. There were no taxes, no wars. When they started farming, things changed forever. Farming created a surplus of food. More food meant more people, so their population exploded. Sure, food was now more available, but it belonged to the farmers now. And since farming wasn't available for everyone, some people began trading their labor and time for food, or they learned how to make tools to sell. This is where our modern concept of jobs evolved from. But despite working from dawn till dusk, they only ate bread and some vegetables. They became shorter and diabetic, or their tooth rotted away because of their carb-heavy diet. Farming also created a class system. Due to the large population, they needed people to manage the food supply, build infrastructure, protect their lands, and provide justice. This gave rise to merchants, kings, and soldiers. In short, some people became more powerful than others. These people created taxes, land ownership, or waged wars that benefited them at the expense of other people. Inequality can be traced to this event in history. Writing. Writing emerged in the first civilization, the Sumerians, around 3200 BC. The Sumerians wrote on wet clay tablets, which were dried up in the sun. Their writing system was called cuneiform. They used writing to keep records of how many sacks of grain they had, how much money someone owed, and to pass down laws. Because of writing, governing lands from far distances became possible. Suddenly, you could tax 50,000 people easily, or pay them to fight for you in a war. If language was the Wi-Fi, writing became the hard drive. Instead of information being stuck inside a human brain, it got transferred to wet clay, and eventually paper. This information could be passed down centuries into the future. You can now read about the lives of the Sumerians, the Persians, the Greeks, and the Romans thanks to writing. Major religions wouldn't have sprung up without writing. All of our scientific achievements are built on the knowledge of previous scientists, which were all written in books. Gunpowder. Today we think of rifles, rockets, and missiles as common technology. But there was a time when the idea of killing someone from a mile away would seem impossible. For most of human history, people fought wars face to face. Ranged weapons included bows, javelins, and slingshots. But they had limited range and required a lot of training to be used efficiently. Then around the 9th century, a Chinese alchemist discovered gunpowder, accidentally while making medicine. However, it wasn't used in warfare until the Mongols conquered China in the 13th century. They used the first firearm in battle. This invention quickly found its way to Europe through the Silk Road, and they perfected it. With this technology, they conquered the Americas, Africa, and parts of Asia. The discovery of gunpowder changed the power dynamics and warfare forever. Before, kings gave land to the knights and the noblemen in exchange for manpower during wars. These knights and noblemen were trained for battle from an early age. With firearms, ordinary people could participate in battle with a few weeks of training. Castles became useless against cannons. That's why the kings in Europe started to build an army from the peasants and the middle class. Gunpowder also made the nomadic warriors obsolete. Before the 13th century, nomadic horse archers were the most elite fighters in the world. They could conduct hit-and-run tactics and chip away at an army's defenses with ease. These nomads were the bane of every civilization, from Rome to the Abbasid Caliphate. But firearms gave armies a better range against the bows and arrows of the horse archer. It's no wonder that the Russians started to overthrow the Mongols right after the gunpowder found its way into Europe. Printing press. Before the 15th century, books were hard to make, so only the wealthy could own them. Then in 1440, German inventor Johannes Gutenberg made the printing press. This allowed books to be printed faster and cheaper. Ordinary people could now own books. As a result, people became more educated. Before, a priest could quote the Bible and strike fear into the heart of the average man. The printing press allowed people to read the scripture for themselves instead of relying on the clergy. German priests like Martin Luther translated the Bible into German. Secularism rose as people started to question their religious beliefs. The printing press ushered in the Renaissance, a period of artistic, scientific, and philosophical progress. It was probably the most important reason why Europe dominated the world, while the rest fell behind. A clear example is the Ottoman Empire, which was the most powerful state in Europe at the time. They banned the printing press due to religious reasons. Then the rest of Europe started to run laps around them in terms of technology and science. When the Ottomans started using the printing press, it was already too late. Countries like Britain, Spain, and Portugal had already eclipsed them. Industrial Revolution. The Industrial Revolution started in Britain during the 18th century. It fundamentally changed the way we live and work. Before the Industrial Revolution, most people lived in rural areas, and only a small percent of people lived in cities. The majority of the population were farmers and craftsmen, and life revolved around a community. If your father was a farmer, there was a great chance you would become a farmer as well. The same case was true of carpentry, shoemaking, or any other trade. Craftsmen took pride in their work and developed unique styles of their own, which they passed down to their children. But then machines were invented. These machines were faster at making products. In farms, One machine did the work of a dozen farmers. Food production increased. More food allowed a bigger population. But the machines also took the jobs of the farmers, forcing them to move to the cities to find work in the factories. Cities became overpopulated. In the 1800s, only 20% of the British population lived in cities. By 1850, this number grew to 50%. By 1900, 80% of the people lived in cities. Craftsmen were also affected by the Industrial Revolution. Before, work was slow-paced, and craftsmen owned their own shops where they sold their products to customers directly. But the machines in the factories churned out products faster than them, creating a monopoly in every trade. So the craftsmen were forced to close their shops and start working in someone else's factory. There, they spent 12 hours a day in horrible working conditions. They didn't own the machines or the products they made, and the owners of the factories took most of the profits. And the large population meant that they were easily replaceable. The long work hours meant that they had less time for socialization or hobbies. The Industrial Revolution took community, traditional work, and turned humans into robots whose only value depended on how much of their time they could give to wealthy factory owners. It also started consumerism as clothes, furniture, and tools became cheaper and more accessible to people. Wars became more destructive thanks to the factories producing weapons on a mass scale.